The cold November wind whipped through the cemetery as Thomas Reynolds stood watching his son's coffin being lowered into the ground. His face remained stone-like, hiding the storm of emotions raging inside him. At 45, with streaks of gray now dominating his once dark hair, Thomas never imagined he would be burying his 17-year-old son, Alex. Just 1 week earlier, Alex had been full of life, laughing, planning for college, talking about the basketball championship. Now he was gone, taken by what the doctors called a sudden cardiac event. But something about that explanation didn't sit right with Thomas. "I'm so sorry for your loss," people kept saying as they patted his shoulder. Empty words that did nothing, to fill the void in his chest. His sister-in-law Diane stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she clutched his arm for support. "He looked so peaceful," she whispered, "like he was just sleeping." Thomas nodded but remained silent. What Diane didn't know, what nobody knew, was that beneath Alex's hands, carefully hidden in the coffin, lay a small camera. Thomas had placed it there just hours before the funeral, when the funeral director had given him a few minutes, alone with his son. The walk back to the line of black cars felt endless. Thomas moved mechanically, accepting condolences with nods and brief thank yous. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation he'd had with Dr. Chen 3 days ago. "I've never seen this pattern in someone so young and healthy," Dr. Chen had said, frowning at the autopsy report. "There were no warning signs? No symptoms at all?" "Nothing," Thomas had replied. "He was fine that morning. Went to school like normal." Dr. Chen had hesitated then, glancing at his notes. "There are some unusual markers in his blood work. Probably nothing, but—" He'd trailed off, then quickly changed the subject. That conversation had planted a seed of doubt in Thomas's mind. As a former police detective who'd worked homicide for 15 years before opening his own security firm, he knew when something didn't add up. Back at the house after the funeral, people gathered with casseroles and sympathy. Thomas moved through his own living room like a ghost, accepting hugs from people he barely recognized. Alex's friends huddled in corners, their young faces shocked and confused. Mr. Reynolds, a tall boy with red-rimmed eyes, approached. "I'm Josh. I was in study group with Alex." Thomas shook the boy's hand. "Thank you for coming." Josh looked around nervously. "Alex was acting weird the last few weeks. Did he tell you anything about the special project he was working on?" Before Thomas could ask what he meant, his brother-in-law Dave appeared, putting an arm around Josh's shoulders. "Hey, buddy, let's get you something to eat. Thomas needs some space right now." Dave led the boy away with a meaningful look at Thomas. That clearly said, "Not now." By evening, the house had emptied. Thomas sat alone at his kitchen table, a barely touched glass of whiskey in front of him. The house felt impossibly quiet without Alex's music, his loud footsteps, the constant opening and closing of the refrigerator. On the table sat Alex's phone and laptop. The police had returned them yesterday, saying they'd found nothing unusual. Thomas hadn't been able to bring himself to look through them yet. Now he reached for the laptop and opened it. The screen glowed to life, showing Alex's desktop background. A photo of him and his friends at the lake last summer. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He clicked on the browser history, finding nothing out of ordinary. School websites, YouTube, sports sites. Next, he opened Alex's email. Homework assignments, college brochures, fantasy basketball leagues. Nothing suspicious. But then Thomas remembered something. Years ago, he'd taught Alex about digital security, how to protect sensitive information. Had his son used those lessons? Thomas searched the laptop and found a hidden folder. Inside was a single document titled Weirdness. It was password protected. After several failed attempts using Alex's usual passwords, Thomas sat back, frustrated. What would Alex have used for something he wanted to keep truly private? On a hunch, he typed Dad1109, his name and Alex's birthday. The file opened. What he saw made his blood run cold. "Something's happening at school," Alex had written. "Started with the honors science program. They're giving us these supplements, saying they'll help with concentration. Most kids are taking them, but some of us are getting weird side effects. Headaches at first. Then I started hearing things, like whispers when nobody's there. Thomas scrolled down, his hands shaking. Mister, Wilson says it's just stress. But I saw him talking to some guys in suits last week. They weren't from the school board. When they saw me watching, Mr. Wilson looked scared. Really scared. 3 students have had health incidents this semester, all in honors science, all taking the supplements. I'm collecting evidence, have samples of the pills, going to tell Dad everything tomorrow. Just need to get through this stupid field trip first. The entry ended there. The field trip had been last Tuesday, the day Alex died. Thomas closed the laptop, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone and checked the app connected to the tiny camera he'd hidden in the coffin. It showed a dark screen with a small status light blinking. The motion sensor was active, waiting. His hands trembled as he poured another glass of whiskey. Had his son been involved in something dangerous? Something that got him killed? The doorbell rang, startling him. Thomas quickly closed the app and went to answer. Principal Henderson stood on his doorstep, his face solemn. Thomas, I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to check on you. Thomas forced himself to remain calm. That's thoughtful of you. Come in. Henderson stepped inside, looking uncomfortable in the silent house. The students are taking it hard. Alex was so popular, so bright. Yes, he was, Thomas replied, studying the man's face. Very bright, very observant, too. Something flickered in Henderson's eyes. Well, yes. That's why his loss is so tragic. They stood in awkward silence until Henderson cleared his throat. The school board wanted me to let you know we're establishing a scholarship in Alex's name for students pursuing science. Science, Thomas repeated. Alex was very interested in the honors science program, especially recently. Henderson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He was one of our best students. After a few more minutes of stilted conversation, Henderson left. Thomas watched through the window as the principal sat in his car for a long moment before driving away. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He kept checking the camera app, but there was nothing. Just darkness and the occasional shadow as trees outside the cemetery moved in the wind. At 3 a.m, he got up and went to Alex's room. It remained untouched. Sports trophies on shelves, college brochures on the desk, clothes tossed over a chair as if Alex had just stepped out for a moment. Thomas sat on the bed, picking up the framed photo from the nightstand. Himself and Alex at a baseball game last summer, both smiling widely. Alex had his arms slung around Thomas's shoulders, looking so much like his mother that it hurt to see. I'll find out what happened to you, Thomas whispered to the photo. I promise. His phone buzzed with a notification. The cemetery camera had detected movement. Thomas's heart pounded as he opened the app. The screen was still dark, but he could make out faint shapes. Someone was at the grave. He turned up the volume and heard muffled voices. Are you sure he had it on him? A man's voice asked. Wilson said the kid was going to expose everything, another voice replied. We need to find it before anyone else does. Thomas stared at the screen in shock. Everything Alex had written was true, and now someone was digging up his son's coffin in the middle of the night. The camera jostled as the coffin was opened. A beam from a flashlight swept across the interior. Thomas watched, frozen, as hands began searching through the coffin, moving things around his son's body. Check his jacket pockets, the second voice said. That's probably where he'd keep it. Thomas couldn't breathe. They were looking for evidence. Evidence his son had collected about whatever was happening at that school. He grabbed his car, keys, his mind racing. Should he call the police? What would he tell them? That he'd put a camera in his son's coffin because he suspected foul play? Before he could decide, the men on the screen spoke again. Found it. Small flash drive in his inside pocket. Good. Let's get out of here. Make sure everything looks undisturbed. Thomas watched in horror as they carefully arranged the coffin contents and closed the lid. The screen went dark again. His hands shaking, Thomas called the one person he knew he could trust, his former partner on the force, Detective Linda Hayes. "Linda, it's Thomas," he said when she answered. "I need your help. It's about Alex. I don't think his death was an accident." As he spoke, Thomas made a silent vow to his son. He would uncover the truth no matter what it took, no matter who was involved. For Alex, he would find justice. The camera in the coffin had captured just the beginning of a story much darker than Thomas could have imagined. But now he had proof, and he wouldn't stop until he knew exactly what had happened to his son. Thomas sat across from Detective Linda Hayes in a small coffee shop 20 miles from town. They'd chosen this place because nobody would recognize them here. Linda looked tired, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "You put a camera in your son's coffin?" she whispered, leaning forward. "Thomas, that's illegal. Disturbing. Trust me, I know." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. But look what it caught. He slid his phone across the table. Linda watched the footage, her expression changing from skepticism to shock. "Holy." She looked up at Thomas. "Who are these guys?" "I don't know yet. But they mentioned someone named Wilson. There's a Mr. Wilson who teaches science at Alex's school." Linda handed the phone back. "This isn't enough for a warrant, and explaining how we got this footage would be complicated." "I'm not asking for official help," Thomas said. "Not yet. I just need someone who knows what they're doing, someone I can trust." Linda sighed. "What about Alex's things? The school return everything?" Thomas nodded. "His backpack, books, gym clothes. I went through it all. Nothing unusual." "And the flash drive these men were looking for?" "Gone. They took it from his jacket." Linda stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "What did the medical examiner say again?" "Sudden cardiac event. No previous heart issues, no family history." Dr. Chen seemed confused by it himself. "And Alex's note mentioned other students having health incidents." Linda pulled out a small notebook. "Names?" Thomas shook his head. "He didn't specify. But I remember the school newspaper ran stories about a girl who collapsed during track practice in September, and a boy who had some kind of seizure in the cafeteria last month." Linda wrote this down. "Both in the honors science program?" "I'm not sure. I can find out." They talked for another hour, making plans. Linda would quietly look into the medical reports of the other students. Thomas would focus on learning more about the honors science program and this Mr. Wilson. As they were leaving, Linda grabbed Thomas's arm. "Be careful. If what you're suggesting is true, that the school is testing some kind of drug on students, then powerful people are involved. People who've already shown they'll do whatever it takes to keep this quiet." Thomas nodded grimly. "They already took my son. I've got nothing left to lose." The next morning, Thomas called the school and asked to speak with Alex's guidance counselor, Ms. Patel. He explained that he was cleaning out Alex's room and wanted to donate his textbooks, but needed to know which ones other students might need. "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Reynolds," Ms. Patel said warmly. Alex was in mostly advanced classes: AP History, Honors Chemistry with Mr. Wilson, Advanced Calculus with Mrs. Lee. "The Honors Science program," Thomas said casually. Alex seemed really engaged with that this year. "Oh yes, Mr. Wilson runs a special research group within the honors program, very selective. Alex was one of only 12 students chosen." "Is that so?" Thomas's heart beat faster. "What kind of research?" "Cognitive enhancement, I believe. The students were developing techniques to improve focus and memory retention. Very cutting-edge stuff." The school board was quite impressed when Mr. Wilson presented the preliminary findings last month. After hanging up, Thomas immediately called Linda. 12 students in a special research group, studying cognitive enhancement. That has to be it. "I found something too," Linda said. "Those 2 students who had incidents, both in Wilson's research group, and get this, their medical reports are sealed. That never happens with minors unless there's a court order." "Someone's covering this up," Thomas muttered. I need to talk to the other students in that group. Carefully, Linda warned. If these kids are still taking whatever caused the problems, they might be monitored. Thomas thought for a moment. Alex's funeral. Some of his friends were acting strange. One boy, Josh, tried to tell me something about a project Alex was working on, but my brother-in-law interrupted. Find that kid, Linda said. But don't do it at the school. It took Thomas 2 days to track down Josh Thompson. The boy lived with his grandmother in a small house on the edge of town. Thomas waited in his car until he saw Josh walking home from the bus stop, then approached him. Josh? I'm Alex's dad. We met at the funeral. The boy looked around nervously. Mr. Reynolds. Yeah, I remember. You wanted to tell me something about Alex, about a project he was working on. Josh shifted his backpack. I shouldn't talk about it. Please, Thomas said. It might help me understand what happened to him. After a moment's hesitation, Josh nodded toward his house. My grandma won't be home for another hour. We can talk inside. Josh's room was typical teenage chaos. Clothes everywhere, posters of bands Thomas didn't recognize, a desk buried under school books. The boy closed the door and pulled a locked box from under his bed. Alex gave me this 2 days before it happened. Made me promise not to open it unless something happened to him. Josh's hands trembled as he unlocked the box. I was going to bring it to you, but then Mr. Wilson pulled me aside at school and asked if Alex had given me anything. It freaked me out. Inside the box was a notebook and a small plastic bag containing several white pills. We're part of this special study group, Josh explained, his voice low. Started as just extra credit, you know. But then Mr. Wilson said we'd been chosen for a pharmaceutical trial. Something about improving brain function. Thomas picked up the bag of pills carefully. They gave you these? Josh nodded. Twice a week. Said they were totally safe. Approved for testing. Most kids were excited, like who doesn't want to get smarter, right? And it worked at first. My grades went up. I could focus better. But then weird stuff started happening. Headaches so bad I couldn't see straight. Hearing things that weren't there. Josh glanced at the door. Carly Jones collapsed during track. Ben Hall had a seizure. And now Alex. Thomas opened the notebook. Inside were detailed notes in Alex's handwriting. Dates, times, dosages, side effects. On the last page was a name, Neurotech Pharmaceuticals. Alex thought they were using us as lab rats, Josh said. He was collecting evidence. Said he had a flash drive with photos of the pills, copies of the consent forms our parents supposedly signed. Did your grandmother sign anything? Josh shook his head. No way. She would have told me. Thomas carefully photographed every page of the notebook with his phone. Josh, this is important. Are you still taking these pills? Not since Alex died. A bunch of us stopped. Mr. Wilson is freaking out, calling our parents, saying we're jeopardizing our college recommendations. Has anyone else gotten sick? Not yet, but we're all scared. Josh looked at Thomas with desperate eyes. What's going to happen to us? Thomas put his hand on the boy's shoulder. I'm going to make sure you're all safe. But I need you to do something for me. Later that evening, Thomas met Linda at her house. He showed her the photos of Alex's notebook and explained what Josh had told him. Neurotech Pharmaceuticals, Linda said, typing on her laptop. They're a real company. Small but growing fast. They specialize in cognitive enhancement drugs. Their CEO is a guy named Richard Green. She turned the screen to show Thomas. A distinguished-looking man with silver hair smiled back at them. Any connection to the school? Thomas asked. Linda clicked through a few more pages. Nothing obvious. But look at this. They recently received a massive grant for a study on adolescent brain development. The grant specifically mentions field testing. Testing on teenagers, is that even legal? With proper consent and oversight, yes. But from what Josh told you, there was no real consent. And the side effects? Thomas paced the room. We need more proof. The notebook helps, but it's not enough. What about the cemetery footage? Linda asked. It shows someone taking evidence from Alex's body, but not who they are or why. Thomas stopped pacing. We need to find out who those men were. And we need to figure out what was on that flash drive, Linda added. If Alex had photos, documentation. Thomas nodded slowly. Josh said Alex was taking pictures, copying forms. A thought struck him. His phone. The police returned it, but I haven't checked the cloud storage. They huddled over Thomas's laptop as he logged into Alex's cloud account. Most of the photos were typical teenager stuff. Selfies with friends, shots of the basketball team, random memes. But in a hidden folder labeled Homework Backup, they found what they were looking for. Photos of white pills, screenshots of emails between Mr. Wilson and someone named RG about dosage adjustments. And most damning of all, a photo of a document titled Neurotech Phase 2 Trial Consent Waiver with Principal Henderson's signature at the bottom. They bypassed parental consent completely, Linda whispered. The principal authorized it for all the students, which is completely illegal, Thomas said, his voice tight with anger. As they scrolled through the photos, Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from Josh. Mr. Wilson asked about you today, wanted to know if you'd contacted any of us. Something's happening. They called an emergency meeting for the research group tomorrow after school. Thomas looked at Linda, his face grim. They know we're onto them. Linda closed the laptop. We need to move fast, before they can destroy more evidence. Or before another kid ends up like Alex, Thomas said quietly. The truth was unfolding, piece by disturbing piece. But the most shocking revelations were yet to come. The school parking lot was nearly empty when Thomas pulled in, parking his car in the far corner where it wouldn't be easily noticed. The digital clock on his dashboard read 5:45 p.m. According to Josh, the special meeting for Wilson's research group had started at 5 wire. Are you sure about this? Linda asked from the passenger seat. She'd changed into plain clothes, her police badge hidden away in her pocket. If we're caught, we won't be, Thomas said, though he wasn't nearly as confident as he sounded. Josh left the side door by the gym unlocked. We go in, get to the science lab, and see what this emergency meeting is really about. Linda nodded, her face grim. And the recording equipment? Thomas patted his jacket pocket. All set. Small enough, not to be noticed. Powerful enough to pick up conversations from across the room. They made their way across the parking lot, staying close to the building. The side door was where Josh had promised, slightly ajar. Thomas pulled it open just enough for them to slip inside. The hallways were dim, with only emergency lights casting, long shadows. Their footsteps echoed despite their attempts to walk quietly. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He'd visited this school dozens of times for Alex's basketball games and parent conferences, but it felt different now. Threatening. Second floor, end of the hallway, he whispered to Linda. That's where the advanced science lab is. They took the stairs, freezing when they heard voices. 2 janitors passed below, pushing cleaning carts and chatting about a football game. Thomas and Linda pressed themselves against the wall until the men had moved on. As they approached the science lab, they could hear raised voices. Thomas recognized Principal Henderson's immediately. Absolutely cannot continue under these circumstances, Henderson was saying. 3 students with serious side effects, 1 dead. The board will shut us down completely. The board doesn't need to know, another voice replied smoothly. Thomas didn't recognize this one. The incidents are unrelated. Unrelated. A woman's voice now, shrill with anger. Richard, these children are experiencing the exact symptoms your own research predicted might occur. Thomas and Linda exchanged glances. Richard, as in Richard Green, CEO of Neurotech. They crept closer to the partially open door. Through the gap, Thomas could see Mr. Wilson standing nervously beside a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit. Principal Henderson sat at a lab table, head in his hands. A woman in a white lab coat paced back and forth. Dr. Chen said the boy's autopsy showed clear signs of neurological damage. The woman continued, damage consistent with our compound. Thomas's breath caught. Dr. Chen, the medical examiner who had seemed so confused by Alex's death. Patricia, please, the silver-haired man, Richard said. "Keep your voice down. We've contained the situation. The autopsy report has been modified. The flash drive has been recovered. There's no evidence linking neurotech to any of this." Thomas activated the recording device in his pocket. "And what about the other students?" Wilson asked, his voice shaking. "I've got 9 kids still in the program, and half of them are showing early symptoms. Headaches, auditory hallucinations, which is valuable data," Richard cut in. "This is exactly why we conduct trials. On properly consented adult volunteers," Patricia snapped. "Not children who were tricked into participation." Henderson looked up. "You told me this compound had passed initial safety trials. You said the school board would receive a substantial grant if we participated. And you'll still get your money," Richard said smoothly. "As long as we all stick to the story. The boy had an undiagnosed heart condition. The other incidents were stress-related. Teenagers these days are under so much pressure, aren't they?" Thomas felt rage building inside him. They were talking about Alex, about his son, as if he were nothing more than a failed experiment. His hand instinctively went to his phone, wanting to check the cemetery camera. Had these people been the ones who dug up Alex's coffin? Linda placed a warning hand on his arm, shaking her head slightly. "Not now." "What about the parents?" Wilson asked. "Reynolds has been asking questions. He came to the school yesterday, talking to the guidance counselor about the honors program." Thomas tensed at the mention of his name. Richard waved a dismissive hand. Grieving father grasping at straws. What can he possibly find? "We have the flash drive his son was collecting evidence on. The autopsy report has been altered. There's nothing to find. Unless," Henderson began, then stopped. "Unless what?" Richard's voice was suddenly sharp. "Nothing. It's ridiculous." "Say it," Richard demanded. Henderson sighed. "One of the janitors mentioned something odd. The night after the funeral, he thought he saw lights in the cemetery, by the Reynolds boy's grave." A heavy silence fell over the room. "You think someone tampered with the grave?" Patricia asked, sounding horrified. "I told you it was ridiculous," Henderson muttered, but Richard didn't seem to think it was ridiculous at all. He pulled out his phone and stepped away from the group, speaking too quietly for Thomas to hear. "We need to wrap this up," Richard announced when he returned. "I want all remaining samples of the compound collected tonight. All documentation. Goes with me? Patricia, you'll supervise the students through a tapering protocol. We don't need any more incidents." "You can't just stop the medication abruptly," Patricia protested. "The withdrawal symptoms could be dangerous." "Then don't stop abruptly," Richard snapped. "That's why I said tapering. Use your medical degree, doctor." Thomas felt Linda tug at his sleeve. They needed to go now before the meeting ended. They backed away slowly, then hurried down the hallway toward the stairs. They had just reached the first floor when they heard footsteps coming down the stairs behind them. Thomas pulled Linda into an empty classroom, leaving the door open just a crack. Through the narrow opening, they watched as Richard and another man, large, with a military-style buzz cut, passed by. "I want that cemetery checked tonight," Richard was saying. "If someone has evidence we don't know about, it'll be handled," the other man replied. "What about Reynolds?" "Let's see what the cemetery tells us first, but keep an eye on him." Their voices faded as they continued down the hallway. Thomas felt cold sweat on his forehead. They were going back to the cemetery. They suspected something. "We need to get out of here," Linda whispered. "And we need to secure that camera footage." They waited until they were sure the hallway was empty, then made their way back to the side door and out to the parking lot. Thomas's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the key into the ignition. "Drive normally," Linda advised as they pulled out of the parking lot. "No speeding, no rushing. We don't want to attract attention." Thomas nodded, forcing himself to drive exactly at the speed limit. His mind was racing. "They're going to check the cemetery tonight." "Yes, which means we need to make sure that footage is safe." Linda pulled out her phone. "I'm calling for backup. A patrol car near the cemetery, but not obvious." As they drove, Thomas checked his own phone. The cemetery camera was still active, still streaming to his secure server. "I set it up to save to the cloud automatically," Even if they find the camera, the footage is already backed up. Good, Linda said. But that's not enough. We need to move faster than we planned. They know you're asking questions. They're watching. You now. Thomas gripped the steering wheel tighter. What do we do? First, we get Josh and the other kids to safety. If they're having withdrawal symptoms, they need medical attention. Real medical attention, not whatever that Patricia woman is planning. And then? Linda's face was set with determination. Then we take everything we have, the cemetery footage, Alex's notes, the recording we just made, to Judge Walker. He's tough but fair. If we can convince him, he can issue warrants fast. Thomas nodded. It was a good plan, but something still bothered him. What about the flash drive? It had Alex's original evidence, the photos he took. They have it now. We don't need it, Linda assured him. We have the cloud photos, we have the notebook, we have the pills Josh gave you. Most importantly, we have the recording of them basically admitting to everything. They drove in silence for a moment. Then Thomas said quietly, the man at the cemetery, the one who took the flash drive from Alex's coffin. I think it was that guy with Richard, the one with the buzz cut. Probably. Linda was texting someone, presumably arranging for the patrol car near the cemetery. Companies like Neurotech often hire private security, ex-military types. Thomas thought about Alex, about how scared and confused he must have been when he started experiencing the side effects of the drug, how determined he'd been to gather evidence, to expose what was happening, how alone he must have felt. I didn't protect him, Thomas said, his voice breaking. He was investigating something dangerous and I had no idea. Linda put her hand on his shoulder. Thomas, you couldn't have known. Alex was trying to protect others. That's what you taught him to do. As they pulled into Thomas's driveway, his phone buzzed with a notification. The cemetery camera had detected movement. They rushed inside and Thomas pulled up the camera feed on his laptop. 2 figures were at Alex's grave, their faces hidden by the darkness. Is there audio? Linda asked. Thomas nodded, turning up the volume. Nothing here, one man said. His voice was muffled, but Thomas recognized it as the buzz-cut man who'd been with Richard. The grave's undisturbed. Are you sure? The second man stepped closer to the headstone, shining a flashlight around the area. Check again. I'm telling you, no one's been here since the funeral. The grass hasn't been disturbed. There's no sign of digging. The second man kicked at the ground in frustration. Reynolds is up to something. We need to find out what. Want me to pay him a visit tonight, see what he knows? There was a pause. Then, no, not yet. Let's see what the doctor says about these other kids first. But keep an eye on his house. The men moved away from the grave, their figures disappearing from the camera's view. Thomas and Linda looked at each other, the same realization in both their eyes. They were coming for Thomas next. Thomas closed the laptop and looked at Linda, his face pale in the dim light of his living room. They're watching the house. Linda peeked through the curtains at the dark street outside. I don't see anyone yet, but they'll be here soon. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling for a patrol car. No, Thomas said quickly. If they see police, they'll know we're onto them. They might destroy evidence. Linda hesitated, then nodded. You're right. We need to move carefully. She checked her watch. It's almost midnight. We need to get those kids help first. Josh said there were 9 students still in the program. Thomas nodded, already dialing Josh's number. The phone rang several times before a groggy voice answered. Mr. Reynolds? What's going on? Josh, listen carefully, Thomas said, keeping his voice low and calm despite the urgency he felt. Those pills you've been taking, they're dangerous. You and the other students need medical help right away. What? It's the middle of the night. I know. I'm sorry. But this is life or death, Josh. I was at the school tonight. I heard Wilson and the others talking. The pills are causing serious side effects. That's what happened to Alex. There was a long pause, then, what do we do? Can you contact the other students? Tell them to meet us at Riverview Hospital. Ask for Dr. Lewis in the ER. She's a friend of Detective Hayes. She'll help without asking too many questions. I can text everyone, Josh said, sounding more alert now. But Mr. Reynolds, my grandma's asleep. I can't just leave. Thomas thought quickly. Wake her up. Tell her the truth. Bring her with you if you have to. Just get to the hospital as soon as possible. After hanging up, Thomas turned to Linda. Will Dr. Lewis really help us? Linda nodded. Laura and I go way back. She's already expecting them. She looked around the living room. We need to get everything we have somewhere safe. If they're watching the house, we can't risk keeping the evidence here. They worked quickly, gathering Alex's notebook, the pills Josh had given them, Thomas's laptop with the cemetery footage, and the recording device from the school. Linda sent the audio recording to her own secure email as backup. We should split up, Linda suggested. I'll take the evidence to Judge Walker's house. He'll be annoyed at the late hour, but once he hears what we have... What about me? Thomas asked. Head to the hospital. Make sure those kids get there safely. I'll meet you there after I talk to the judge. Thomas nodded, though the idea of separating made him uneasy. Be careful. These people are dangerous. So am I, Linda said grimly, patting the gun holstered at her side. Don't worry about me. They decided to leave through the back door. Thomas's yard connected to a wooded area that ran behind several houses. They could slip away unseen if someone was watching the front. Just as they were about to leave, Thomas stopped. Wait, there's one more thing. He disappeared into Alex's room, returning moments later with a framed photo of Alex at his last basketball game. He carefully removed the back of the frame and took out a small memory card hidden behind the photo. Alex taught me this trick, Thomas explained, his voice thick with emotion. He said it was the best place to hide things because no one thinks to look behind pictures in frames. What's on it? Linda asked. I don't know, but Alex hid it for a reason. They slipped out the back door into the cool night air. The woods were dark, but a 3/4 moon provided just enough light to see by. They moved quietly, staying low, until they reached the neighboring street where Linda had parked her unmarked police car earlier. Good luck, Thomas whispered, as they prepared to part ways. You too, Linda replied, squeezing his arm. I'll see you at the hospital. Thomas watched her drive away before heading to his own car, which he'd left parked several blocks away as a precaution. His mind raced as he drove toward Riverview Hospital. Would the students show up? Would Dr. Lewis really help them without asking questions that could alert Neurotech? And most worrying of all, what would happen when the men watching his house realized he wasn't there? The hospital's emergency entrance was quiet when Thomas arrived. Only a few cars dotted the parking lot. He checked his watch, 12:45 a.m. He found a spot near the entrance and waited, watching for any sign of the students. His phone buzzed with a text from Josh. On our way. 4 others coming too. Couldn't reach everyone. 5 out of 9. Better than none, Thomas thought. Another text came through, this one from Linda. Judge Walker listening. Concerned but wants more proof. Working on it. Thomas frowned. They had recordings, testimonies, the pills themselves. What more did the judge need? His thoughts were interrupted by headlights as a car pulled into the lot. Josh stepped out, followed by an older woman, his grandmother, Thomas guessed, and another teenage boy. Thomas got out to meet them. Josh, thank you for coming. Josh looked pale and nervous. This is my grandma, Mrs. Thompson, and this is Pete. He's in the program too. Mrs. Thompson fixed Thomas with a stern look. Josh told me everything. If what he says is true, someone needs to go to jail for this. That's the plan, Thomas assured her. But first we need to make sure these kids are okay. More cars arrived. 2 girls stepped out of one, another boy from the next. All of them looked scared, confused, and very young. Thomas's heart ached thinking about what they'd been through, what Alex had been through. He led them inside, asking for Dr. Lewis at the reception desk. Within minutes, a tall woman with short gray hair appeared. I'm Dr. Lewis, she said briskly. Linda called me. Let's get these young people checked out. The next hour passed in a blur of medical tests, blood draws, and questions. Dr. Lewis worked efficiently, keeping her voice low as she explained to Thomas what she was finding. "These kids definitely have something unusual in their systems," she said, looking at preliminary blood test results. "I've sent samples to the lab for more detailed analysis, but I'm already seeing markers consistent with experimental cognitive enhancers." "Will they be okay?" Thomas asked. Dr. Lewis's face grew serious. "Some are showing concerning neurological symptoms. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but they need to be monitored closely as whatever this is leaves their systems." Thomas felt a chill. Alex hadn't been so lucky. His phone buzzed again, Linda calling. "We've got a problem," she said without preamble. "Judge Walker wants to see the memory card before he'll issue warrants. Says the recordings could have been manipulated. The pills could be anything. He needs something definitive." "I haven't even looked at what's on it yet," Thomas replied. "Well, now's the time. And Thomas, I drove by your house on my way to the judge. There's a black SUV parked across the street. They know you're gone." Thomas's pulse quickened. "I'll check the card now. The kids are with Dr. Lewis. They're safe." He borrowed a laptop from the hospital's administration office, inserting the memory card with shaking hands. The card contained only one file, a video. Thomas clicked play. Alex's face filled the screen. He looked tired, worried, but determined. Thomas's breath caught in his throat at the sight of his son, alive and speaking. "Dad, if you're watching this, something's happened to me," Alex began. "I hope I'm wrong, but I think the people behind this study might be dangerous." Thomas turned up the volume, leaning closer to the screen. "I've been collecting evidence about the research program at school," Alex continued. "Mr. Wilson told us it was a special opportunity, that we were helping advance science. But things started getting weird after we began taking the supplements." Alex described the headaches, the auditory hallucinations, the way some students had become ill. He explained how he'd started investigating, taking photos of the pills, copying emails, recording conversations. "The company behind this is called Neurotech Pharmaceuticals," Alex said. "Their CEO, Richard Green, visited the school last month. I recorded his meeting with Principal Henderson and Mr. Wilson." The video switched to footage clearly taken from a hidden phone. The same silver-haired man Thomas had seen at the school was speaking to Henderson and Wilson in the principal's office. "The trials need to continue," Richard was saying. "The military contract depends on it. They want a compound that enhances focus, memory, and decision-making in high-stress situations. If we deliver, Neurotech's value increases tenfold." "But these are children," Henderson protested weakly. Richard smiled coldly. "Children with developing brains. Exactly what we need to test neural plasticity. The paperwork is already done. The consent forms you signed on their behalf are legally binding." "And the side effects?" Wilson asked. "Acceptable losses in the bigger picture," Richard replied dismissively. The video switched back to Alex. "There's more evidence on the flash drive I've hidden in my jacket pocket. If anything happens to me, look there first." Thomas felt tears streaming down his face. His brave, determined son had known he was in danger, had prepared for the worst. "I love you, Dad," Alex finished. "I'm sorry if this puts you in danger too. But someone has to stop these people before more kids get hurt." The video ended. Thomas sat frozen, staring at the blank screen. Then he pulled out his phone and called Linda. "I've got it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Proof of everything." Alex recorded Green admitting they're using the kids as test subjects for a military contract, admitting they forged consent forms. "Send it to me," Linda said immediately. "I'll take it to Judge Walker right now." Thomas forwarded the video file. Alex knew Linda. He knew he was in danger. "He was incredibly brave," Linda said softly. "Now we need to be brave too. Because once these warrants go through, all hell is going to break loose." Thomas hung up and went back to check on the students. They were all being treated, some already showing improvement as the drugs began to leave their systems. Josh caught his eye and gave a weak thumbs up from his hospital bed. Thomas nodded back, forcing a smile he didn't feel. The evidence was on its way to the judge. Help was coming. but Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in danger. Just then, his phone buzzed with a new notification. The cemetery camera had detected movement again. With a sense of dread, Thomas opened the app. The camera showed several figures at Alex's grave. They were digging. They had realized what Thomas had done. And now they were trying to find the camera that had recorded their first visit, the camera that could identify them. Thomas had to warn Linda. Thomas stared at his phone in horror as the figures continued digging at Alex's grave. His hands trembled as he called Linda. "They're at the cemetery," he said when she answered. "They're digging up Alex's grave right now." "I'm just leaving Judge Walker's house," Linda replied, her voice tight with urgency. "He's issued the warrants. Police are being dispatched to Neurotech headquarters and to arrest Richard Green. What about the cemetery?" "I've already called it in. Officers should be there in minutes." There was a pause. "Thomas, stay at the hospital. Don't go to the cemetery." Thomas knew she was right, but everything in him wanted to confront the people who had caused his son's death. "The kids are stable. Dr. Lewis says they'll be fine." "Good. That's good news." Linda's voice softened. "Thomas, we've got them. Alex's video was exactly what we needed. Judge Walker was furious when he saw it. The warrants cover everything. All of Neurotech's records, Green's personal devices, the school's files. What about Wilson and Henderson? Them too. No one's getting away with this." Thomas watched the cemetery feed again. The figures were becoming more frantic in their digging, throwing dirt aside carelessly now. "I have to go," he said suddenly. "Thomas, I'll be careful, I promise. But I need to see this through, for Alex." Before Linda could argue further, he hung up. He quickly checked on the students one last time. They were all resting, some already sleeping, as medication helped ease their withdrawal symptoms. Dr. Lewis gave him a questioning look. "I have to go," he explained. "The people responsible for this, they're at my son's grave." Dr. Lewis's eyes widened, but she nodded. "The students are stable. I'll keep them safe." "Thank you." Thomas squeezed her arm gratefully before hurrying out to his car. The cemetery was only 10 minutes from the hospital, but it felt like the longest drive of Thomas's life. His mind raced with questions. What would he do when he got there? What if the police hadn't arrived yet? What if the men were armed? None of that mattered. These people had killed his son. They had experimented on children. They had to be stopped. As he approached the cemetery, Thomas could see flashing police lights in the distance. He parked on a side street and made his way on foot toward Alex's grave, staying hidden among the trees and tombstones. The scene that greeted him was chaotic. 2 police cars had arrived, their lights casting eerie blue and red patterns across the gravestones. 4 officers had surrounded 3 men, the silver-haired Richard Green, the buzz-cut security man, and a 3rd man Thomas didn't recognize. Alex's grave was a mess. The earth dug up, the coffin partially exposed. Thomas felt sick looking at it, but he forced himself to move closer, staying in the shadows as he listened. "This is a misunderstanding," Green was saying smoothly. "We received reports of grave robbing in this cemetery. As a concerned citizen, I came to investigate." "At 1 in the morning?" one of the officers asked skeptically. "And your first response was to dig up this particular grave?" "We had specific information." "Save it for the judge," the officer cut him off. "We have a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Green. You and your associates need to come with us." Green's smooth facade cracked. "On what charges? This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are," said a familiar voice. Linda stepped out of one of the police cars, her badge visible on her belt. "Richard Green, CEO of Neurotech Pharmaceuticals. You're under arrest for fraud, endangering minors, illegal drug testing, falsifying medical records, and in connection with the death of Alex Reynolds." Green's face went pale. "You have no proof of any of that." "Actually, we have quite a lot of proof." Linda held up her phone. "Including a very interesting video your people tried to retrieve from Alex's body the night after his funeral." The buzz-cut man looked nervously at Green. "Sir, we should call the lawyers." Green ignored him, His eyes locked on Linda. Whatever you think you have, it won't stand up in court. My company has the best legal team money can buy. Your money won't help you this time, Linda replied calmly. While you were busy digging up a child's grave, police were raiding your offices and seizing your records. It's over, Green. As the officers led the three men to the police cars, Thomas finally stepped forward into the light. Green saw him and froze. You, he said, his voice a mixture of anger and surprise. You put a camera in the coffin. Thomas nodded, his face grim. My son knew what you were doing. He was gathering evidence against you. He knew it was dangerous. Green's eyes narrowed. It was just business. The drug showed promise. A few side effects in testing are normal. Your son shouldn't have interfered. Thomas lunged forward, but Linda caught his arm, holding him back. He was 17 years old, Thomas said, his voice shaking with rage. You used him as a lab rat. You killed him. Get him out of here, Linda told the officers, who quickly loaded Green into the back of a police car. As the cars drove away, Thomas stared at his son's desecrated grave. The sight of the disturbed earth and exposed coffin broke something inside him. He fell to his knees, overcome with grief and exhaustion. Linda knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. We'll make it right, Thomas. The cemetery will restore everything by morning, and Green and his people will pay for what they did. It won't bring Alex back, Thomas whispered. No, Linda agreed softly. But it will honor what he tried to do. He saved those other kids, Thomas. His evidence, his courage, it saved them. Dawn was breaking by the time everything was settled. Cemetery workers had carefully covered Alex's coffin again, promising a full restoration later that day. Thomas sat on a nearby bench, watching as the first rays of sunlight touched his son's headstone. Linda approached, looking tired but satisfied. Just got word from the station. The raids at Neurotech and the school were successful. They found everything. Records of the illegal trials, the military contract, emails discussing the side effects. They even found records of payments to Dr. Chen to falsify Alex's autopsy. What about the other students, the ones who weren't at the hospital? Officers are contacting their families now. They'll all get proper medical care. Linda sat beside him. The school board has called an emergency meeting. Henderson and Wilson are both suspended pending criminal charges. Thomas nodded, taking it all in. What happens now? Now? Linda smiled slightly. Now we build the case, and you take care of yourself. You've been through hell, Thomas. 6 months later, Thomas stood at the front of a crowded courtroom watching as Richard Green and his co-defendants were led in for sentencing. The trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. Green's expensive lawyers had been unable to counter Alex's video, the cemetery footage, the medical evidence, and the mountain of incriminating documents found at Neurotech. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked directly at Green as she delivered the sentence. 20 years for corporate fraud, illegal human experimentation, and negligent homicide in Alex's death. Similar sentences were given to his associates, to Principal Henderson, and to Mr. Wilson, though the latter received a slightly reduced sentence for cooperating with the investigation. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Thomas, shouting questions. He had become the face of the case, speaking out against corporate greed and the exploitation of children in medical testing. Mr. Reynolds, how do you feel about the verdict? What's next for you now that the trial is over? Thomas held up his hands for quiet. Justice has been served, but this isn't just about my son anymore. This case exposed a broken system that allowed powerful companies to experiment on children. That's why I'm announcing today the formation of the Alex Reynolds Foundation for Medical Ethics. We'll work to ensure that medical research is conducted safely and ethically, with proper oversight and real informed consent. Later that evening, Thomas visited Alex's grave. It had been fully restored after that terrible night, and now fresh flowers bloomed around the headstone. Thomas placed a small plaque beside the flowers, the Foundation's first official certificate dedicated to Alex's memory. We did it, son, Thomas said quietly. Your evidence, your courage, it made all the difference. He touched the headstone gently. I'm still not sure I did the right thing putting that camera in your coffin. It felt wrong, disrespectful. But somehow, I think you knew I'd find a way to uncover the truth. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Thomas felt a sense of peace that had eluded him since Alex's death. The pain would never fully disappear. How could it? He had lost his child. But there was comfort in knowing that Alex's death had not been in vain. The other students had all recovered fully, their young bodies resilient once the drug was out of their systems. Several of them had become advocates themselves, speaking at schools about the importance of questioning authority and standing up for what's right. Josh, in particular, had found his voice. He had spoken at the trial, his testimony helping to seal Green's fate. Now he was working with the foundation, determined to honor Alex's memory by continuing his fight. Thomas took one last look at the grave before turning to leave. The small camera that had started it all was long gone, but its impact would be felt for years to come. It had captured not just evidence of a crime, but also the legacy of a brave young man who had been willing to risk everything to protect others. As Thomas walked away, he could almost hear Alex's voice on the wind. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son," he whispered back. "Always will."